Once again, this is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala, as always, joined by Jay Carter with Fresh Haircut, also known as Timid, the hip-hop artist in the chair of BLM's Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Feeling the wind in my hair.
There you go. Do you feel lighter?
Um, in some cases, yeah. Some cases I feel a little bit lighter. It's just I hadn't had long hair in a while, and I do like my long hair, nice and luxurious locks, as it were. But sometimes, you got to think about things you don't have to think about when you have short hair. Like, when you go out the door, like you have to like actually do your hair.
Mm,
When it's short, you just get up and go.
right, right. I ain't got to worry about that. All you got to do sometimes is get a fresh shave, maybe straighten the beard up a little bit.
Yeah, like you don't have to worry about the rest of it. But yeah, with that you had to. So
Yeah, problems. I'm just happy that the sun is coming back out. We had a really bad thunderstorm here earlier, but it seemed to fizzle out faster than threads. So here we are.
whoa, why was the shot? What was the shot at Threads?
Not a shot, but it was just funny how threads for like a couple of days was all of a sudden be the next big thing, and now people don't talk about it anymore.
Yeah, people are still getting on there, doing their thing. I think Threads has a very unique opportunity right now, but they have to move much faster because with all the drama going on with Twitter, because it's now supposedly now called X.
Right. But is
And
that going to take? I saw a funny meme earlier. I don't know if you saw it. It was like this whole Twitter X thing reminds me of when you're at a party and someone walks in and says, "Everyone calls me the serpent," and no one calls him that.
I don't know. Like it's, he's been pushing it, or at least he just suddenly popped it up on everybody. News came out today actually that apparently he didn't secure any of the trademarks needed. So like Microsoft owns a certain thing with trademark on X, Meta owns the thing
Xbox.
on
Yeah,
X with regards to social media.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so and Microsoft and Meta are not really cool with him, so they're probably not gonna make it easy on him. So
But there you
I
go, Meta. I mean, who even says Meta unless you're talking the context of the company trying to be very specific, but no one refers to Facebook as Meta. Right?
No. Oh, well, Facebook is still Facebook. It's just the parent company became Meta. So,
And people
he's
still
not
say Facebook, I think, when they talk about usually even activities with the company, unless you're trying to be, like you said, very specific about it.
right. Right. So, yeah, I'm still going to call them tweets. He's
Right.
saying that tweets are going to be called X's from
Oh,
now
come
on.
on. That just
Like,
sounds like trolling to me.
it seems like it's trolling, right?
Yeah.
So what Threads is lacking right now is, there's no follower feed, so you can see only tweets or threads from your followers. There's no way to automatically insert gifs in your tweets.
Oh, the humanity.
And there's no hashtags yet on it. So I think they're missing a few things, but if they put those things in, it would be much more like the Twitter people are used to, and we could coax more people through. And I think the biggest roadblock I think they're going to have though is that it's associated with Instagram, so you have to have an Instagram account to have a Threads account, which I
Right.
think is really going to slow down their progress.
Yeah,
I get
definitely.
why they did it,
But that's
but
also, I think, what helped them establish themselves as quickly as they did. So
that's
that's a double-edged
exactly,
sword.
yeah. Because they had a base in already. They have whatever, hundreds of millions or whatever it is that Instagram has automatically have that base. They don't have to go through the growing pains. So did like what 70 million new users in like a day or something. I think they did that for that reason. And I would guess at some point they're going to separate it from Instagram so that you can have an individual login
Hmm.
after they get that big solid base so that they can have an advertiser pool. So
We shall see what happens.
we shall.
All this social media makes my head spin. It's just like another thing to keep up with.
Yeah, you know what? I don't. I give Threads not as much attention as Twitter, and I don't do that much Twitter these days.
That's
But
what I mean, right? It was that shiny new toy for a couple days, and now it's not.
yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on how much you were using Twitter before, right? I use Twitter for some promotional things, but it's still, I don't know. I think the algorithm is still an issue on Threads because you get shown what you get shown. Like you have no choice of who it is. Even if you follow people, that doesn't mean that's what's going to come in your thread.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you miss out on a lot of stuff.
Well, I'll say, speaking of missing out, but not really. I think we were talking about Carvana last week.
Yeah.
I guess there's the segue. Carvana missed out, right? Because I went to the dealer and did get what I would consider to be a good deal, but there was a lot of negotiating involved.
Was it a better than what Carvana was offering you?
They wanted to offer me the same, believe it or not. And I said, that doesn't really make any sense. But then they were telling me, yeah, but the tax incentive will be better because you can save on this tax if you do a trade-in. And I said, yeah, well, Carvana gave me the same story. But I wanted better. I was disappointed with the Carvana offer. It was a couple thousand below the market value of my car. I said, listen, I'll just sell it privately. Not that I want to, but I understand taking a little bit of a hit for the convenience of it, but I don't want to drop thousands of dollars on it. So right. There was negotiation involved, and they did go up on the price. They still were below the market value for the car, but they were at least $1,000 above what Carvana offered. And I said, listen, we may be able to work something out if you come down on the price of the car I'm going to buy, right? Which I've done before. I actually did that same song and dance with the dealership once before. And we negotiated over it. They didn't want to come down a lot, but I eventually told them this is where I was at, either take it or leave it. And they eventually took the deal, I think begrudgingly, right? Because at first they said no, but I said, well, call me if you change your mind. And they changed their mind right away.
Nice. Very nice. There's that law school training.
Yeah. Stick to your guns, and I think it's important in a negotiation. Obviously, it's a negotiation, so there's going to be some wiggle room there. Otherwise, you're not negotiating, but you should have what they call a reserve in mind, which is your bottom line number, right? The lowest you'll go or the highest you'll go, depending on which way you're negotiating, and never go beyond that, even for $1. And it might sound silly, right? But you can lose a deal over $1, but you can flip that same question back to them. Are you going to lose a deal over $1? Right. It does work. Of course, you have to be prepared for the possibility that you don't get a deal. But you have to go into a negotiation willing to accept that possibility. You shouldn't be afraid of that, because then you're negotiating from a position of weakness. You don't want that. You want to go in thinking, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm trying to do. Here's my bottom line. I'm not going to accept anything less than that. And you know what? If I don't get it, that's okay. You have to be okay with it, because that gives you a lot of strength in negotiation, right? If you are desperate to make a deal, then you get taken advantage of.
All right.
The other thing that they teach you in law school, actually, well, I don't know if all law school teaches. I was very fortunate to take a special class on negotiation in law school. And one of the things that they taught was to negotiate around your price, your number, right? So oftentimes what you'll see is you'll offer a number. Let's say the other side comes back and it's way less. Let's say, you're trying to get the most money here. They offer way less than what you're looking for. Oftentimes the expectation from the other side is that you're going to meet them somewhere in the middle, right? Like I say 100, they say, how about 50? And then they think, okay, you'll come back with 75, right? And sometimes they'll offer that, trying to get you to that midpoint. But what you should do in your negotiation is negotiate around your number. So so I'm trying to get around 100 and they say 50, I don't come back with 75. I'll say, okay, how about 92? How about 91? Like you stay close to what you want.
Right.
You don't let them just push you far away from your number.
Right.
So looks like we got Sheba joining us. Hey, Sheba.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
You doing all right? And yourself?
I'm doing okay, been busy, but yeah, I had a couple of funerals to attend, but
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So we do have some topics we want to cover, and we don't want to go too long tonight. So we should get into
Okay.
it. But before we get into our main topics, I know, Sheba, you and I were speaking on that Jonah Hill incident, which Jay and I covered a couple of weeks back. But I want to get your perspective on that as a woman, because a lot of people were saying that Jonah Hill was misusing the word boundary. And when he said, these are my boundaries in a relationship, he was really being manipulative. So what was your thought on that?
Well, I would ask the question, is her being a girlfriend, how far does she go in the relationship? Because people do have boundaries. So it depends on what they agreed upon when they entered the relationship.
Well,
That's what
an
I think.
interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think, Jay, you brought up the fact that he knew what she was into when they started dating, right? She was it a surfer? I forget now. Did she do some surfing modeling or something?
She's a surf instructor, and so yeah, when they met, that's what she was doing. That's her livelihood. And so as you do, someone who's a surf instructor or works on the beach, she's going to be in a bikini or all the time, and that's probably going to be the bulk of her pictures. That could be what he saw when he first saw her. I don't know. Yeah. But the expectation that she not post swimwear pics on her Instagram seemed a little bit of a reach, if that's her profession.
But why was she posting them?
She's a surfer.
Is that the way she gets work? Or is it was she posting them for professional or for just to have them on there? What was the reason?
I couldn't say exactly, but I mean, it's her profession. She's going to be in a bikini most of the day, every day. Just like any of us posting pictures from work, you'll be, in your work clothes. I mean, those are her work clothes. Now, he also mentioned about being a model, so she probably was trying to get into modeling, which wouldn't be too far-fetched, again, for somebody working in that type of field. So
is it realistic? I mean, and maybe these are two different questions, right? Number one, is it unrealistic or unreasonable of him to expect her to change that, knowing especially that that's what she was doing already? It shouldn't be a surprise to him. So I don't know why he would act so shocked and outraged over it, number one. But number two, is that somehow manipulative, or is that a misuse of the word boundary for him to say, I don't want to be with someone who engages in this lifestyle?
Is that what he said, though? Or was he saying, you have your work, you do your work, but when you're with me, you're with me?
But it wasn't when you're with me. It was, I don't want you doing these things at all.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. And it was to the point where, at least she remarked that, I guess, because they were going to counseling, and apparently in the counseling session, the therapist was trying to get her to agree that anytime she's out there surfing, if a male surfer comes near her, that she should just swim away.
It sounds like a lot was going on there we're not aware of. There's a lot. It seems like a lot of things going on in the relationship itself that we may, behind closed doors, so to speak, that we're not aware of.
I had thought the same thing, just looking at it, taking a cursory glance at it. I thought, I don't know what's going on here, but it seems like there are some major trust issues, and perhaps this relationship is not the most healthy to begin with.
Right. Because he even in the message that she posted up from him, one of the last things he said was something about these are it made it sound like there had been some kind of trust broken prior for some reason in regards to this. I don't know if there was, but just the way it was worded, and I forgot what it was now, but yeah, we both thought, that sounded like there was something more going on, just like you said, Sheba.
Yeah.
Now, the one other thing about this was that apparently, so this is his ex-girlfriend, and they've been broken up for a while. And she posted these messages at the same time when his current girlfriend is giving birth to his child or something like that. So just out of the blue, she decides that she's going to post these private messages. And they haven't been together, I think, for like a year or something like that.
And that's the part of it that wasn't really spoken on. At least it didn't seem to be the front and center of the conversation. Everything I saw on it was about him being manipulative by using therapists' language to try to sound like these are boundaries, but they're not. I didn't really see people talking about how come she's posting these old messages and the timing of when she's posting them.
Right.
Well, I did see an editorial who said that they, and I quote, that her cell phone needed to be taken away because it came. I think somebody else was complaining about their partner, and she piggybacked off of that incident at the time. So and I think some people, from what I understood in this article, were very annoyed and like, she needs to go away.
Well,
and I was like, well, what, I was asking, I would question that too. Why is it coming out now?
Exactly.
Because usually when things happen, people will tell you, right, they bring the issues to the forefront right away. But why was it happening when someone else said something about their partner? It just seemed to me that the timing just wasn't good for what, I don't know what she was trying to accomplish or what happened.
It sounds like them not being together was a good thing.
Yes. Toxic. That probably was a very toxic relationship.
And that's what it is. To me, that's kind of my takeaway. Life is too short to surround yourself with people and situations that are just toxic and aren't good for you, right? Maybe they're good with other people, but for whatever reason, it wasn't working out for them. And
right,
we could leave it at that, right? It's fine. Walk away, and we're all gonna have our different views as to whether it was approached the right way by either party. But for whatever reason, it seems like it wasn't a good look for them. We don't need to be in bad looks for us, right? Let's try to remove these sources of stress from our lives.
Yeah.
So true.
Well, speaking of,
I could tell you what the last I spoke, I think before that, I was a moderator, a co-moderator. I don't think I spoke on being a co-moderator for the mayoral race in Poughkeepsie, New York.
You mentioned that you were doing that, yeah.
Yes, and it turned out to be very good. It was held at Cunin Hackett in Poughkeepsie, and it was packed.
Nice.
Yeah, it was packed. And the primary, the Democratic primary took place, and Yvonne Flowers, she's the first Black woman. If elected mayor, she will be the first Black woman to ever hold that position.
Oh, wow.
And a Democrat.
And she's expected to win, right? Isn't that a Democratic city?
Yes, she's expected to win.
There you go.
So
it's history, and you got to actually be part of that history in some way, Shiva.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
So, excellent. I wanted to talk about this federal judge blocking the president's asylum policy. Now, it looks like this is going to be headed to the Supreme Court. So I think the saga is going to continue on this. But this is breaking news right now.
I heard that.
So the president was actually trying to limit the number of asylum seekers coming into the U.S. by putting some kind of filter, if you want to call it that, in place, where they had to make an appointment. Let me see. I think there were two different ways they can get in. And one of which was to show that they were denied entry from a previous country. And the other was to make an appointment, to schedule an appointment where they could be screened. Let me see if I can pull up this article. So
limit the amount coming in.
They were trying to limit the amount coming in by putting these controls in place. And the federal judge overturned that or blocked that rule, which will now, at least temporarily, allow more asylum seekers in, because they're saying that this Biden policy is actually similar to a Trump policy, which the same judge also struck, in that it's an attempt at the executive branch of the government to override the legislative branch. In other words, Congress already acted on this. Congress already put controls in place, already has a law on this. And in their view, this is the president improperly commandeering the legislative branch, right? Making its own law when it's not the province of the executive branch. So this will be appealed, and the story will continue on this. But as of now, it seems to indicate that more people will be able to come in without these checks.
Right. Which is kind of contrary to what the conservative talking points is in a way, because the idea is that liberals and Biden, they just want an open door to let everyone flood on through and overrun America. But it sounds like they're probably trying to put that the liberals or Biden's administration are trying to put some controls in place so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it does seem like the last two administrations tried to enact similar policies on this. Although, if we're going to delve into it even deeper, the Trump administration certainly was, I don't know if restrictive is even a word, right? Much more harsh on people coming in, you know, kids in the cages and things like that, right? So let's not say it's exactly the same, but at least when it comes to this particular policy, they both seem to have these controls that they were trying to put in place, and the federal judge is striking them.
Well, what controls are they? I did hear that. But what controls? They didn't go in depth to what controls, what controls are they trying to put in place?
So, yeah, there were two that I mentioned. I was trying to find the exact language here in the article, but one of them was they had to show that they were denied access in another country, seeking asylum in a different country. And so, they weren't just coming to America first.
Right.
And then the other one, I believe, had to do with trying to schedule an appointment so that they could be screened by officials.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah, you did mention that.
Yeah.
But I think how do they? What's the path that they get here? Is he talking? Is he referring to those that are coming at the border?
Yeah.
So he's focusing on that issue. So what is the path of them getting to, how do they get to this country? What's the path that they take that they can come through, come up to Texas to get here?
What do you mean?
Am I asking the right question? Like what's the travel? How do they travel to get here? Are they going, what countries do they go through before they get here?
Oh, they would have to get through Mexico to cross our southern border.
Yeah. No matter where they're coming to the border, they've got to go through Mexico.
Right. A lot of them are originating in Central America.
Right.
You got to go up through Mexico.
Yeah.
So does Mexico tell them no, that they can't stay in Mexico if they seek asylum?
I believe yes. That's been a criticism that I think you've seen people leverage against Mexico when Mexico pushes back on the U.S. trying to enforce its immigration policies. People say, well, look, your southern border, when people are coming in from other parts of Central America, you enforce that. You don't want them staying in your country. So how are you going to push back when the U.S. is trying to enforce theirs?
And that was also one of these criteria that the administration set, which was en route to the U.S., right? So let's say you're passing through Mexico.
Right.
Did you ask Mexico for asylum, for example? Did you ask another country for asylum, or are you just coming here first?
Right.
Right.
No.
Because from what before President Obama left office, I think those people that are coming now were already in, I forgot what country it was, but if I remember correctly, um, when he left office, he said that they could not enter the country. Is that correct? Before he left, with the last day, because they had those asylum seekers, it seems like those asylum seekers that are coming here now are from the Obama administration because they waited 2 years. Yeah,
What do you mean?
I think they couldn't enter the country. I think before he left, I think, and I'm going to look it up, but I think he told them that they would not be able to enter the country, that they had to wait wherever they were. So when Donald Trump got into office, Donald Trump was like, no, we're going to have set measures or set up, what was the word, Mike, you just used?
Controls,
Yeah, in place
criteria.
so that, right, that we limit the number or they don't enter at all. But I think it started on the last day of President Obama's administration. I have to look that up.
There's a report that an increasing number of these folks are Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans, and that's becoming an issue because due to strained diplomatic relations between the U.S. and those countries, we really can't support people back to those countries.
Yeah, and that's probably what it was, if I remember, yeah. Because they had to, they come here, they wait 2 years and they become citizens. Is that correct?
No.
Was that correct?
No. Wait 2 years and become citizens automatically? No.
Anybody gets to
citizens. They have to go through a process.
No. Oh, yeah.
But they have to go to a process.
Yeah. And in fact, I was talking offline to Jay about this. We actually know someone who I believe is going through that process now or is about to. It would be a good guest to have on the show to talk about what he's gone through or what he needs to go through to get that citizenship process.
And a former guest also just went through that process. We had, remember Sam from Australia. She got her citizenship within the past year as well.
Yeah.
And she came through that channel? Was that the way she came?
She didn't come through as a refugee or
asylum seeker.
Yeah, asylum seeker or anything like that. She came through the normal way.
Right, but it would be good to see people that were able, because I think this has been, asylum seekers have always been coming to America, and it would be nice to get someone that has gone through that path to talk about what it takes once you to actually become a citizen.
Yeah. Now there's a little bit of a caveat here. I just say that the ruling would allow more asylum seekers in. However, the judge did put a 14-day stay on his own ruling before it takes effect, which may allow a Supreme Court appeal on this. So this might actually go up to the Supreme Court before any actual change happens in the policy. But as it stands now, the policy was struck down, right? So that would open the door for more people to come in without those controls.
Yeah, because if he hadn't struck that down, they would be stuck where they are. Is that correct?
Well, people could still get through, but it's like a screen, right? It's more restrictive. You have to, again, show you try to get into other countries and you're making an appointment for a screening with officials.
And being on a nuance, I think it's necessary to mention that, the other side of this is that realistically, there has to be some kind of a limit, right?
Right.
We just can't have a completely open immigration border or whatnot. There has to be some, because people have to have somewhere to go, right? Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of people that come in and end up homeless, or end up putting a stress on the system that it may not be able to take, or a variety of reasons. And
that's what we're seeing in New York City right now. And the mayor is trying to actually push back on that. The city council is giving him a hard time. In fact, they overrode his veto on that. I believe that was the first veto the city council in New York City overrode since the Bloomberg years, right? So it didn't happen that often. But he's saying that the city is going to go broke trying to care for and support these folks. We don't have the budget for it. We have to put limits on it. He's saying there's no room here. They're doing what they can with the situation they have. So it's a very tough situation. And yeah, he's trying to push back and to Jay's point, say we can only do so much.
Right.
But
Yeah,
there are those who say that the human rights side of this takes precedence and we have to find a way to make it work, even if pragmatically it's difficult.
And yeah, it makes it a very difficult decision, makes it a difficult position, because there is that human rights side of it. You know, people are seeking from, you know, very difficult situations. But, you know, you got to weigh both options as well.
That's
unfortunately, if the system can't bear it, then you're going to create another crisis. In the place, the destination is going to have a crisis. And
I believe one of the things the mayor is now trying to do is go down to those border areas and distribute literature telling people not to come to New York City.
Not to come to New York City?
Yeah. He's saying we have too many. You know, we can't handle the strain that's being put on our resources. You know, they're putting folks in homeless shelters to the extent possible, but we know there are many problems there.
right.
That's true. And I know he tried to send them.
Are complaining about it, that they're saying that these local shelters are going to be bombarded with migrants to an increasingly greater degree.
And then what happens to homeless people that are here who need those services as well?
Right.
And I know here, you know, further north, when he was sending them to Dutchess and Orange County, they said no, that they put a stop to that because of the resources.
Right.
The towns are small. The towns, they have a difficult time dealing with the homelessness that they have here in the towns because they never had to deal with homeless population before. Now that they have, they're really struggling to deal with it. So that's why they put those.
Go ahead.
I said, that's why they said, you know, he could not send them to Dutchess in Orange County because because as I said, we have homelessness here, and that's something we never had to deal with before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we don't need anyone else until we figure out how to handle the situations that we have at hand.
Well, there was a story that you might be familiar with. Apparently it was a Motel 6 or some establishment like that where they kicked out all of the paid guests. I think it was somewhere upstate or somewhere up there. They kicked out all of the guests in this hotel and replaced them with migrants. So the people who were at the hotel were very upset that they were kicked out.
Yeah,
right.
They did.
That story. I think what could be done, and I don't know if that's what they're doing and how they're doing it, is look at the different states across the country at the federal level, either reach out for that information to see what kind of capacity everywhere has, and then try to send people to places where there are open spots to try to be able to help as many people as possible, and to try not to overburden one system to where there becomes another problem later on. Have everyone send in with their capacity. How many can you take in? How many are you able to provide for? In New York City, there are a lot of empty buildings that, office buildings in Manhattan and whatnot, but it's still, there has to be a budget in place to be able to fund and finance a large portion of people coming through. And so if they can't do that, even having the housing is not necessarily going to be the solution. And then
what would you say? You're going to pay off the people who own these buildings?
Right. And that's another issue there. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if that's how they're doing it. If they're saying, listen, let's put a feeler out to every state, and each state from every city and county to send, how many are you able to, in your budget, deal with? How many are you able to take in and provide for? And then let's accumulate that data, and then we can start sending people to these locations to help as many as we can possibly do.
So you're saying there's plenty of room in the Dakotas and Wyoming, like look at sparsely populated areas?
It's possible. If there could be, there may be smaller areas, maybe they can take, 10 families. And and send 10 families up that way. Maybe there's a little small place in Ohio somewhere that can take 6 or 7 families. That way, I think it'd be able to, if we have that data, we'd be able to help as many people as possible, and then look at what the limits could be. Instead of, okay, we're going to take everybody that comes in, we're going to send them to New York, and now New York has to figure out what to do with it, and New York's already going through a budget crunch, but possibly, like you said, the Dakotas might have a few spots available over there.
And then you also have the policies and the rules and the laws of those individual states. And it's been controversial that New York City is known as a sanctuary city. They call us even a sanctuary state. There was a decree in a lawsuit a while back saying that basically New York has to provide services to homeless people in the state. And that's why you see even other states trying to dump homeless people, not to use that term harshly, but that's what the states are intending to do, right? They're doing it, I think, in a harsh way. They're trying to say, we don't want you folks here. We're going to make you New York's problem because we know New York can't turn you away.
Right. Yeah.
But but where they can't, where the state doesn't turn you away, the towns can have these injunctions that'll say, stop, no, we have to.
Yes, that too, right? And now you're even seeing New York City pushing back against, right? The mayor of the city is getting his own city council, right? The city council of New York City. There's all this interfighting happening now over it too.
And I think if we get to see what each place can comfortably provide for, then we'll have less of that infighting, because then it's not, okay, we're fighting over resources, we're fighting over budget. If you can comfortably handle, say, 10, 20 families, and that's what gets sent your way, then there'd be less of an infighting. If someone's trying to send you 50, 60, and you can only handle 20 comfortably, then you're going to have these infighting between people saying it's not in our budget, we can't do this, and whatnot.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems like the city council is trying to fund this with no limitation in sight, and that could be a problem fiscally if it ends up bankrupting the city or really putting a strain on the city's resources, as we're seeing start to happen.
Right. And we get it. People who need help. I mean, we get that. It's it's not an easy situation either way.
Right. And we did talk about, in the context of that affirmative action case, it's not a zero-sum game where one person's success is automatically someone else's failure. But with that being said, resources are finite. And so that needs to be kept in mind too.
Yeah,
that's true.
Well, speaking of the affirmative action case that we covered here, there has been, I guess, a development on that, if you want to call it that, or at least a fallout from that, in that the federal education department is announcing now an investigation into the legacy admissions practices of Harvard, because they're saying that with affirmative action no longer being allowed in college admissions, you can still do things to ensure a diverse campus, one of which is to cut back or eliminate the legacy admissions, where you give preference to people who are the descendants of alumni, right? Oftentimes wealthy, certainly affluent folks, and disproportionately white. And so they're saying, listen, you want more diversity on campus, you can't directly do affirmative action per the Supreme Court anymore. Well, why don't you start by losing this legacy preference that you have?
And I don't think the people that took up the fight, that backed this fight to get rid of affirmative action, I don't think they looked that far ahead in that regard, because these would be people that were definitely for legacy admissions, that sent kids to their alma mater type of thing. And it could be this case of, your own attack coming back to bite you, whatever that saying goes. But yeah, it could be. I find it interesting from a constitutional / legal perspective, because when we broke down that affirmative action case, we said that the policy was subject to strict scrutiny because it discriminated on the basis of race, right? In other words, it looked at an applicant's race in making its determination as to whether they should go to that school.
under the 14th Amendment, and then you have the Civil Rights Act. Obviously, that's frowned upon, right? You have to overcome a very high bar to survive scrutiny in a case like that. Well, this legacy admissions issue. Okay, ahead, Shiva, you had a question on that?
No, I was going to say, but with the affirmative action, and from what I understood years ago,
yeah,
affirmative action was if you went to that college and you had a white student with the same test scores, SAT scores, you should be admitted, even even though you was a person of color or Black people, African Americans, you should be admitted if you have the same qualifications or you make the same test scores.
Right. In other words, the idea behind it was that you shouldn't be excluded, right? Because
exactly.
of race. Yes.
So how? And I'm trying to say, but my question is, how did it turn into color? How did the affirmative action turn? Who made it a color? In this, they made it a color issue. But the reason why it happened was that if I wanted to go to Harvard, I have the same scores as someone that's has a legacy, or I have the same scores as someone as a white person on affirmative action.
No,
I could be admitted because I met the criteria.
No, you're absolutely right. That was the goal of it, and remains the goal of it. But the thing is this: when you're doing this analysis from a legal perspective, you look at what the policy is on its face. And if the policy is that we can take race into account when it comes to admissions, it becomes presumptively unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. Not that it's never allowed, right? And in fact, I'm on the side that it actually should be allowed. But there is a high bar to overcome because the 14th Amendment says everyone is entitled to equal protection under the laws, meaning presumptively, you can't treat one group of citizens, one group of people different from another group of people unless you can overcome the strict scrutiny. So you have to show that you have a compelling state interest in doing it and that you're doing it in the least restrictive means possible. So that was what the argument was about, whether they had that compelling reason and whether it was narrowly tailored, whether that was the least restrictive means of achieving that compelling interest. So yes, strict scrutiny applies, but I would argue this is a case where it should still survive that scrutiny because you did have that very compelling reason and they did what they needed to do to try to ensure diversity on campus and preserve the integrity of the institutions.
So that's why I don't understand what happened that this Asian student complained.
Well,
you don't understand why they complained?
I thought, was it an Asian student? Because I saw an Asian.
Right. What it was is there's a group called Students for Fair Admissions, I believe is the name of the group. And the face of that group is generally in the public these Asian students that are complaining, saying that they were being passed over for admissions to the schools that they wanted to get into because of affirmative action, giving spots to less deserving and less qualified Black people. And so, but the truth behind that is, I mean, sure, they participated in it, but the truth behind that is there was this conservative white group that was the one that pushed them towards this. They were the ones that basically went up to those Asian students like, you didn't get in because of those Black guys, because of affirmative action.
Right.
And
no,
so
that's not the case. That was not the case at all.
It's not the case.
That was something to get this, whatever, that was something is it something, well, let me ask a question. Maybe I should ask a question. Is that something to keep us, to keep us from getting into the school? Because when you go to those schools, you have to have the SAT. They don't take you with a C level and C average in those schools.
It's the same.
Not a C average, no. But they're right. But the scores that you needed to get into those schools were a little bit different on average, depending on whether you came from what they called an underrepresented minority group, because they were trying to get more people in to have a campus, to have a student body more representative of the population of the country. right? And so we looked at it, for example, in Harvard Law School, you needed an LSAT a few points. I think it was like 4 or 5 points lower if you were an underrepresented minority. Now, an Asian student, believe it or not, was classified as an overrepresented minority. So it was actually harder for them to get it.
Right. And it's because, I mean, you look at the
The
percent,
school set that up then,
well, you look
because
at the,
that's not, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, you look at the percentage of the student body, and Asian students were pretty high up there, almost consistent with white students, even though they're a much smaller part of the population of the country. You know, they're what, I think they're less than 10%. And so, but they were still on par attendance wise. And so that idea that they were being discriminated against and not being able to get in is completely false. But it was pushed, that narrative being pushed, and it was the same people that have been the same type of people that have been trying to get rid of affirmative action since it was implemented in the first place. It's not, that's not the first fight to try to get rid of affirmative action. They've been trying to get rid of it for the 60 years that it's been around.
Yeah, they have been. And that's my point. So they had to find a way, it seems like, where they could say, all right, we don't need it.
Right.
It's violating.
So let's put a person of color face on it, and a minority face on it this time, and then let's try to push it that way. And this time it worked.
Right. And you could draw parallels to how the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act by saying that, well, it's no longer necessary. Basically, racism is over, right? That was kind of what they were saying in their opinion.
Right.
They took a similar approach here, I think, where they're saying it's not a compelling interest. They said things like, oh, it's admirable, it's commendable, but it's not a compelling interest. Basically, they were downplaying the seriousness of the issue to say that the state, the college couldn't meet its burden of strict scrutiny, which is a tough bar to overcome, right? We'll admit that. But they're saying that they couldn't meet that bar because they didn't have a compelling interest, because it's a nice thing, but it's not really that important. That was their attitude towards it, right? So we've seen this attitude kind of consistently from this court. This shouldn't really be much of a surprise. We've seen it, but it's still a disappointment, still something that we should talk about and talk about how we're going to push back against. That's why I think this legacy admissions issue is interesting. And I had made the point previously that it's not quite the same. If you were going to challenge this constitutionally or challenge this legally, it's not quite the same as the affirmative action case, because on its face, this isn't racial discrimination or race-based policy at all on its face. But when you dive into it, you do see that it's very disproportionately beneficial towards white students and wealthy students in particular, because that's usually who gets the preference in these legacy admissions. These are the families who tend to be contributing a lot of money to these colleges. And so they have an interest in keeping them happy, right? So taking that approach, you could actually start to draw some parallels to the affirmative action case. If you were going to try to defeat the legacy admissions legally as well, you could say that this is a form of race-based discrimination. It gets a little bit tricky because there is a difference now constitutionally and via the Civil Rights Act, and that goes to public versus private, but then that gets a little fuzzy as well, because even these private schools get a lot of public subsidies. And so you do have a lot of issues at play here. But broadly speaking, when it comes to the Civil Rights Act, you could show a disparate impact. Whereas when it comes to the Constitution, you have to show that it was intentional discrimination. So, you really would have to show that the policy was.
But that's the thing, you said policy, and in a lot of cases, I don't think the policy, it's actually an actual policy.
It's not an actual policy, and that makes it tricky to challenge in its own right. But even if it was, right? Even if it was, let's say Harvard, you can go into Harvard's admissions book and they say, we give you 10 more points on your application for a legacy. I don't think it says that. But even if they said something like that, it's still not saying that we take your race into account. That's a different thing constitutionally. So I'm saying the analysis of that would be different. When it comes to a civil rights claim, I think you can draw more parallels to it, because you can start looking at the disparate impact. Okay, your policy doesn't say that it's racially based, but if you dig into it, you see what's going on here, that it really is in many ways. So there are parallels to draw here. I find that interesting that they're doing that, but they're not the same analysis under the law.
Right, but the thing is how they use it, with because when you have Harvard, as you say, have the white students that can get into these schools without any problem, affirmative action would lend itself to color because those are the people that were being blocked out.
Well, here's also an interesting point.
Right, but hold on a second. So I just wanted to be clear on that this Supreme Court case that just happened overturned one that previously said that you can't have a quota system in college admissions. You can't say we're taking 30% Black students, 20% Asian, whatever. You can't do it like that, but you could qualitatively take race into consideration when choosing whom is admitted. And so that's why it facially does have that racial element, because they were allowed to take race into consideration as a factor. And of course, the reason why they did that was to try to correct those injustices that existed. But that does leave it vulnerable to that constitutional attack, because on its face now, you're making discriminations or you're making separations based on race.
Yeah.
Right. And just to keep in mind that the people who benefited the most from affirmative action policies were actually white women, even though it was set up to be more to make it equitable and fair for Black and brown and people of color in general. White women benefited the most of it.
Right. But now, again, when you talk about the 14th Amendment, you talk about equal protection, race is a protected class, subject to strict scrutiny, right? Gender has gotten what they call intermediate scrutiny, but it's also kind of a tough bar. So it's a little bit below race. When you're talking about someone's financial status, that only gets rational basis review, meaning that it's very deferential to the policy, right? Whereas if you're separating people by race or by gender, then it's deferential to the people challenging the policy, right? It's presumptively unconstitutional. Whereas if you're just making a distinction based on the amount of money someone has, on its face, that is rational basis, meaning they only need to have a legitimate reason. It needs to be rationally related to that reason. Basically, they can do almost anything if they're separating people on the basis of money or something that's not a protected class. Anything that's not a protected class, it's rational basis. So it's kind of a cheap way to have discrimination, because, even racially or, in terms of these other factors, by classing it as something different, right? If we're saying, well, we're not doing it by race, we're doing it by affluence, we're doing it by wealth. Okay, but what does that really mean? Right? You're still kind of, if you look at the result of that, you are still discriminating by race by doing that, because we know that most of the people who are wealthy are white. Largely, it's not going to be everyone, but largely speaking, especially when you look at admissions in these schools now, right? And that also goes back to the case where the dissent made a point that these schools historically have been discriminatory towards people of color. And so even if their policy is, well, it's all about the grades, even if there's no affirmative action policy, we just let everyone apply, we take the best students. If that's what they say they're doing, look at the actual results. And they said historically, you needed much more credentials, right? You needed higher grades to get into these elite schools if you were a student of color than if you were white. So if you took comparable students in terms of grades, the white student was going to get in a lot more often, right, than the non-white student, which is why you needed affirmative action in the first place. But some of that also might have to do with legacy admissions.
Well, I think this decision is going to cause, there's a trickle-down effect with this decision. And I think it's a lot of issues, or a lot of problems, or what they quote consider problems, are coming out. Are going to be attacked, are going to be questioned. Like give up the legacy. That's a result of affirmative action. What else is coming behind that? That trickle down effect is going to be quite interesting to see.
Well, there's going to be trickle down effect on it. And we mentioned last time we had the discussion on it, when California did away with affirmative action in the college admissions back in the late 90s. Immediately the following year, there was a very significant drop in admissions of Black and brown students in universities. And they're only now, 20 years later, almost seeing those numbers come back up to what they were in the 90s after that drop, because California's been trying to do other policies to to make up that shortfall. But it's taken about 20 years to even get back to that level. So you imagine within that 20 years, if that policy was in place, how many Black and brown students could have benefited and been educated to the college level and gone on to have whatever their careers and whatnot that come out of that. So that's a significant, very significant part. 20 years worth of students is a significant piece.
It is.
Well, check this out. This was a study that was published yesterday, it seems, led by Harvard and Brown researchers that found that wealthy students were twice as likely to be admitted to elite schools compared to their lower or middle income counterparts who have similar standardized test scores.
Sure.
So think about that. Another reason why affirmative action was in place.
Didn't Bush two Ivy League schools? You can't tell me he had straight A's.
But think about that. You're taking students now. I want to make this point because a lot of people say, it's just about the scores. It should be maybe, but that's not what we see in practice.
Right.
Take two students with similar test scores, and a wealthy student, a student who comes from money, is twice as likely to get in to the same school as a student with the same scores without that money.
Absolutely.
And not only that, you have to have money. What about the people, the trustees, their families?
That's
they get in too.
That's the legacy.
That legacy. You have trustees that their family members go, and people that are well connected.
Right. And I think this
they get in.
It's kind of that hornet's nest effect. Like they've kicked the hornet's nest with this to some degree. And we're going to see how that plays out, where people are coming after legacy admissions practices now. And that's going to make people who benefit from it very upset and unhappy, because of course I should get in. This is what we've been doing for, generations.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Should the schools be allowed to, I guess that could be a whole question, but just want to get your brief thoughts on it. Should they be allowed to give preference to legacy folks? I mean, if these are the families, let's say, who are keeping the school running, they're the ones giving the gifts. Should they be allowed to give anything in return to those families and say, well, we're going to let your kids in because we want you to keep giving us money. Without that money, maybe the school will fail and won't be as prestigious anymore.
I think a gift is a gift. If it's a gift, it should be a gift.
No strings attached.
Right.
Well, is it a gift at that point, or is it buying your way in? Didn't someone just get some actress get in trouble for something?
Yeah, if you try to put those conditions on it, but
they're unspoken. Right? This policy.
That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all guess why rich students would get in, regardless of the color. We could all guess why a rich student would get in more often than a poor student, even if they have the same qualifications, is because those are looking at the potential for the donations from their family afterwards, because they want that money.
Or from them. I mean, I get letters from my schools all the time, my alma maters, right? Saying, you've graduated this year, we're checking in, we hope you can give us a gift of any size. It will be great for us. They reach out to all of their alumni trying to get contributions to the school. So obviously it is more beneficial for them financially to have wealthier alumni because they're going to be giving more money.
So
so should that not be allowed? And I guess my question is really about business. Let's say it's not a public school. Let's say, for argument's sake, it's not even being subsidized by the government. Let's say it was a purely private institution. Should they be allowed to make decisions like that? Really business decisions, right? I mean, because we look at colleges as serving the greater good, serving the public interest, but they're also sometimes private institutions. Should they be allowed to make those decisions for themselves? If they're not racially discriminating, although we see that there is that disparate impact, but right, if you're going to put that aside, should they have that autonomy, or should they be regulated in that area?
But they usually do. They do have that. I mean, because how many private schools that have those legacies, and they're quaint little schools,
Mhm.
and nobody else gets in but the people, you know,
Right. Yeah.
the
Oh, sure. But my
donors.
question is, should that be allowed though? I mean, should they be given that freedom to operate the way that they want to and let the market decide? People will say that, right? If you don't like it, don't go there. Don't even apply there. Don't send your kids there. Screw it. Go to a different school. I mean, should that
Yeah,
be the case, or should we be
but
regulating
see,
all the colleges?
the thing is, Mike, people and money are funny. If a person is giving their money, then they feel they have a right
Uh-huh.
to say how it should be spent.
I think it
And that's,
I think it
I
kind of
think
I think it's kind of a complicated question.
it is.
We can say you can see several sides, right? One, we say it's a private institution; they should be allowed to do what they do. You can say it's an education institution; they have a responsibility to the public in that regard. But it does complicate matters when you're thinking about, if you're talking about schools that are like Ivy League schools, for example,
Right.
where whether or not the education is any better, the prestige of it has a very profound effect on your future and future opportunities. So not only are you by restricting who gets in because of legacy admissions or whatever, or taking those spots, you're not only depriving them of that education, but you also could be you know, having a disastrous effect on their future, or a limiting effect on their future because of what the weight of the image of the school carries.
Mm-hmm. So you think it should matter
Well,
that it's an Ivy League school,
it,
a prestigious school, versus one of these quaint little colleges? I mean, does that make a difference in the analysis or in the moral calculation?
I don't think it should.
yeah, but that's not how the real world runs. You know, and I understand, but it's I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to. I really don't know, because, like you said, it's a tough call.
I mean,
It's a tough call in some way. It's a tough call.
right. I mean, absolutely. If it becomes more of a difficult question when it's a private institution. If it's a public institution,
Right.
that
Absolutely.
with the
And you know
answer,
what? Yeah. And that brings up, I think, a whole different question, which is, should education be privatized at all? I mean, maybe even all of our universities should be public.
I don't know if we can say that though, because then that
Yeah.
means no matter what you do, you can't create any sort of an education program. But then the question would be is if you
you
do,
don't have to say any educational program, but accredited degrees, let's say, like to give a bachelor's degree or a master's, like certain degrees.
right. Well, that comes from then that would be the accredited body. Be like, okay, look, part of the accreditation process is that you have to have
Right.
percentage or this diversity in your thing. But I guess they're not allowed to do that anymore, or not
But
allowed
see,
to.
Mike, when you talk about it on that level, you have who gives them someone's get. How is it that they can be accredited by the state?
There are
Because when
multiple
you talk,
bodies around the country.
right, right, but
Apply
that
to.
yeah, that I know. But I'm saying, when you talk about private schools, what makes them private? That they can have hands off. Like, you can't govern our body.
Well,
What
a lot
makes
of it
them
comes a lot of it comes down to the subsidies that they get from the government. So even if they're private schools, if they're largely funded by taxpayer money, there's that state action there, and that's how you get the Constitution to come into play, right? These rights that we talk about, which really are only against the government. You ask, how is Harvard subject to the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment if they're a private school? But you've seen cases looking at the amount of subsidies that some of these private schools got, and that's how you got the state action there.
Right.
And then when it comes to discrimination, you also have the Civil Rights Act, which says that private businesses cannot discriminate on the basis of race either.
Right. And I think that's an important point as well. If you're taking any sort of public funds, then you shouldn't. Yeah, you have to have
right,
some
you have to. You should be open. But then if you're not, they
private
have
or
a
not.
right to say, yeah, we don't. We allow. If you have the money, you can come. You can attend.
And that gets back to the whole thing. If you have the money, is even saying that, and that just might be inherent in higher education in this country, and maybe it's really a foundational problem that we're dealing with here. But to say, if you have the money, are you inherently discriminating on the basis of race?
Given that wealth is so disproportionately distributed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, it's not facially, and that does change the analysis, right? But it's that disparate impact which is relevant.
And ultimately, I mean, it's really kind of like you know, cutting off your nose to spite your face, and that a more educated population is better for the country as a whole.
Right.
We compete better globally. More business will come this way if we have a higher educated population. I mean, remember in the 2008 crash, when there was people were looking for jobs and it was desperate. It wasn't that the positions weren't available. It was that we didn't have the people that were educated to the level to be able to fill a lot of these positions. I mean, there was, of course, jobs that were gone, but there was a lot that went unfilled because we just didn't have the educated populace to do it. Yeah. Right. This ultimately, having everyone educated in some form or another, ultimately helps the whole nation as a whole to become more prosperous.
And that's why it's not a zero-sum game. So even if you are a white student or an Asian student or any kind of student, you want to attend a school that has prestige and that keeps its prestige and that is truly representative of the country that these students are going to be working in and participating in the economy of, right? And so it's actually better for you too to be in a better school, a more diverse, more school that represents America, represents the country, represents the world, because that will better equip you for the world and will make us all stronger. You know, so it's a matter of making the school more well-rounded, which makes all of its students more well-rounded.
So it's, yeah, I think the easiest answer to your question, Mike, is in 3 different parts. The first part is, if you're a public school, then no, you shouldn't be able to do that.
If you're now,
the question that you just posed about should the schools be able to make that judgment call on whether or not, I think if you're a public school, absolutely not. If you are a private institution that takes public money in some way or shape or form, no, you should not. If you're a private school, I think it becomes a little more difficult. If you're a private school that solely subsists on your own funds, becomes a little bit more of a difficult discussion. But if you take public money, any sort of public benefit, then no, you should not.
Right.
Right. If it's purely private, you start to ask, okay, who are you to tell me who I'm allowed to teach? Kind of.
Right. That becomes a then you know, I think that what you fall back on is are you in line with the Constitution? It's completely.
Right.
But what about the Civil Rights Act, though? If you can show that disparate impact,
that type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that does apply to private businesses as well. That's an interesting argument, right? If you can show even a private, and what if it's not even a school like Harvard? Let's say it's some little program that someone started in their basement, right? But and it's all private, and there's not big money involved, right? It's very small operation, but they're training people to do a certain skill that's very useful in a particular area, whatever it is. Like, it's a niche thing, but it's very important in that local economy. You know, if you can show that that particular institution is only bringing in people who are the children of alums, right? Like, it's basically exclusively a legacy thing. And it just so happens that they're all white, let's say, or they're all Asian, or they're all certain thing. Do you have a claim under the Civil Rights Act to show that there's a disparate impact here and that the business is discriminating, even if they're not saying that they're discriminating on race? That's effectively what they're doing. And I guess that would be fact-based based on what was actually happening there. Was it a coincidence, or what was the deal? But it is interesting to start looking at that and to say, okay, you're acting like these legacy emissions are so innocuous and it's not race-based discrimination, but what is the overall effect of that? And is that just a way to circumvent not being allowed to discriminate on the basis of race? Are they still doing that but calling it something else?
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. It's so much now. It looked like it has opened the door to other things. As you said, kick the hornet's nest.
And I think it
Yeah.
should. I think we're going to have to, you know,
Yeah,
keep challenging things in this.
yeah, because Mike, I worked in a school some years ago. I worked in a school, and I can count people of color that went to the school
Hmm,
um, on one hand,
Yeah.
and but the school was very expensive.
right. And let's be fair
You
in
know,
as far
I
as
mean,
this
that's the way it was, the
this
way it
is
is. It still is.
yeah, let's make a point to point out that this wasn't Harvard or Yale or any of the Ivy League schools that went after these policies to overturn them. That this
Right,
was a third party,
right.
and for their part, even though places like Harvard are ridiculously expensive and kind of exclude people by price alone, they have made
Mhm.
efforts in the past to make spots available and to make grant money and things available for people who
Right,
are not in that financial class that normally goes there. So they've done a lot in that regard.
right. But now, was the argument based on that?
I
Was that argument based on that?
I don't
And
No, it wasn't about financial aid.
right. So I'm just saying as far
but
as
we don't know what started it. What started the conversation?
we know what started the conversation. Same one that's been starting the conversation since affirmative action was put in place, since Black people were brought here. That's been the
Garden
same.
variety racism is what started the conversation.
This is overt
Right,
race.
but I'm saying in this day and time, let's look at present day and time.
Hasn't
What
changed.
started
Yeah, I
that
mean, has
conversation?
it really
Was
changed?
it?
We saw a
But
study that just
I'm
came out.
just
It just
throwing
came
it
out
out
this
there.
week. It just came
Just
out this
I'm
week,
just
right? Showing that wealthy
I
students were
could get
twice
all
as
this
likely
financial.
to be admitted.
Uh-huh.
I said the study just came out this week showing wealthy students were twice as likely to be admitted. I mean, obviously, a lot of this discrimination is still going on.
Right, but let's look at it like this too. Just a thought. Doesn't have to.
Yeah.
They open up where they have to, as they say, accept that quota
No,
number.
no quota.
No quota.
They have a certain number of African American. Do they
That
go?
was
Is it
that
like
was
that?
struck down a long time ago.
Okay.
Having a certain
Well,
number was not allowed. What they just struck down
okay.
now was even taking race into consideration at all.
Right. But supposing what I'm saying is if let's say these schools open up,
Mhm.
they open up and they say, oh, we have these funds and we have enough funds to allow, let's say, Black students in to give them a full ride or pay so much of their education. And another student, maybe the Asian students, say, oh, I should be a part of that as well. Is that a possibility that something like that could have happened?
Well, affirmative action wasn't paying for people's
No, I'm not saying paying. No, it's how it's structured. Affirmative action is what was made added to the Constitution. But
No,
once the schools got it, what did they put? What did they put in place, and how did they interpret it? Once they got that.
no, affirmative
Once
action was
affirmative
not in the
action.
Constitution. Equal protection has been in the Constitution since Reconstruction, right? That's the 14th Amendment.
Well, let's say
Affirmative
the
action
civil
was
rights.
challenged under the Equal Protection Clause as not
Right,
being
but
constitutional.
it all stemmed out of the civil rights movement, affirmative action.
Right.
It stemmed out of the civil rights movement.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is that if you have something open, if you open up something, which I have seen this done with schools, some schools will do, there comes a point in time where they'll say, we're going to open this up and we're going to invite, say you have a school that's elite, very elite. We have funds that we're going to invite students of color that we will give them either.
You're talking about like the grants or scholarships?
Right. Because that came into question too. That's coming to question. They're saying do away with that. So my question, so I'm trying to see what happened that all of this came in to say now, how are they going to get there? Because now when they did that, it also questioned, should we have the scholarships for them?
Right.
See?
That's the trickle down effect that we were talking about, right? It's going
Exactly.
to start getting into these other areas, and things are going to be questioned, right? This decision doesn't automatically knock everything else down, but it sets a dangerous precedent.
Right. Yeah. And it's with something that people are going to point to when they want to make an argument for whatever it is that they're disgruntled about, whether or not they're justified in being upset or not.
Perfect example, MWBEs, right? Minority women-owned business enterprises, which a lot of state and local governments do try to get more contracts, more government contracts given to businesses owned by women and people of color. You can take a case like this. Again, it doesn't automatically strike it, but it can be used as precedent to try to build a case against a program like that.
Right. Exactly. And in some way that happened. Well, my point is, in some way, I think, this is my opinion, and it doesn't have to be true. In some way that happened in that school, something happened. In some way, I think that happened in the school. To some extent, I think it might have happened.
Yeah. Well, what happened is this group that Students for Fair Admissions, it was backed by this very conservative, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now. I forgot it. It's conservative white guy that's been pushing against this stuff for decades, right? And like we discussed earlier, he was looking for another way. And so this was coming at Asian students who were disgruntled about not getting into schools that they felt that they should have gotten into, and saying basically, hey, the reason you didn't get in is because affirmative action took your spot, because they had to give it to these black people or these brown people.
And so there was an opportunity there to get these students and these groups on board, because that has been a political battle that's been waged over the past few years when it comes to standardized tests. A lot of the Asian populations, in fact, have been trending more conservative in their voting patterns over that issue, because some of these more left-leaning groups and politicians have been rallying against even having standardized tests, because they say that they're inherently unfair.
Right. And what it is with the admissions process, it's not as cut and dry as people want to make it out. It's not just the test score. You have this grade point average. That's what we base it on. They base it on a bunch of different things, and extracurricular activities and things you're involved in, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times what they saw in the research was that while Asian students were scoring very high, some of the highest scores as far as the test scores were concerned, they were falling behind other groups in different areas of that the admissions process took into account, which was, kind of balancing out why some might get in and some might not get in. So it was a very complicated process. It wasn't affirmative action that was keeping them out of schools. But when you're upset about something and you feel, okay, I've worked my whole school career to get here, this is where I wanted to go, and you don't get in, and someone's telling you, well, this is the reason why. I mean, everyone's looking for a reason and a scapegoat, and they keep pushing this to you. And then of course they're going to start shoving you literature and everything that make it seem like this is correct. Then, they're like, look, we're going to fund this. We're going to get this changed so people don't have to suffer what you've suffered through, because you're the victim.
And when people are feeling that angst already, it becomes easier to pit people against each other, right? Like someone pull string and says, go after them. And it's like, they're gaming the whole situation to serve the agenda that they've had all along.
Right. Exactly. And all it takes is just one angry person, right?
Right.
To start the ball rolling. Right.
Or somebody with money, which is really the crux of the whole issue.
That's true.
When it comes to the legacy. So this
was just real quick. The conservative act who runs Students for Fair Admissions is Edward Blum, BLUM. So you can look him up, but he's the one that's behind all of it. And he's been doing this thing for a long time.
So let's put the poll question out. The poll question of the week is, do you believe that legacy admissions should be allowed when it comes to college admissions? Did I say that right? Or is that redundant? Legacy admissions, college admissions? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. So speaking of polls, because we didn't want to go long, but we did do a poll last time on social media and parental consent, right?
Yes, we did. So what's going on, just to reiterate, Arkansas has put forth a law and was passed by the governor there, who is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was the former spokesperson for Trump. And in that law, it states that people have to provide identification. They have to have all social media to access any sort of social media. So that means if you're going to open a Facebook account, you would have to provide identification. If you use Twitter,
right. Let's be clear though, because we did look at the actual legislation last time. They have to verify their identity, and it left it open as to how that was done. One of the choices that the law gives the social media companies is providing your state issued ID, but it said, or you could use any commercially available, reasonable age verification. So it kind of left that open-ended to find some kind of software out there. I don't know if there is a lot of stuff out there that doesn't use ID. We talked about maybe just the old school way of just asking someone to enter their birthday. That could be one as well. I don't know what they're going to consider reasonable though.
Right. And there are verification services out there. The U.S. government uses one, and I forget the name of it off the top of the head, but they use one. And so basically what you do is you provide your identification to this company. And then when you go to, if they were going to say Facebook is using that company, then it would just basically be that company would be verifying that you are who you say you are. Right. But at some point, you still have to verify yourself with someone. You may not be doing individually with each company. It could be with one big service, but there's a bunch of questions as well. The
law is requiring some form of age verification to get on social media. They're on its face trying to keep children from getting on without parental consent, but they're sweeping everyone into it, because in order to find out if you're a child, you have to show your ID. So even an adult is going to be burdened, right? They're going to have to try to figure out how to get on, with their ID or by whatever way. And the question then is, does that restrict their free speech?
Right. So we put the poll up in that regard to say, should age verification and parental consent be required to access social media? Now, we got quite a few views on YouTube over it. We got a couple of comments here. All the comments that we did get, there weren't a lot, but they did say yes. But only one of them actually went into a little bit of a background. And they were taking the point of yes, but age verification shouldn't be a problem for adults. As for minors, you see statistics on children being stressed about social media. Age verification, parental consent should at the least make parents aware that their children are on social media. And then they went into an anecdote of, my nieces were not allowed on social media until their last years of high school, and I think that's a good thing. Now, in this it's more a parent responsibility in that point. And even in this comment, it doesn't seem to address that the company's doing verification. This is more about the children, and that's kind of where they're trying to target this law. But if you're a parent and you don't know your child is on social media, then that's a different issue, right? You have all devices.
And if you're not a parent at all, you still are swept into this nonsense. You're just trying to get online, and you have to show your ID for what? I got nothing to do with this. I don't even have kids.
I just want to tweet memes. I don't want to have to go through all this.
I want to look at cat videos. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
something.
So I went through and asked, we went further on that. They clarified a little bit more, and they were saying like perhaps they could provide another way, like providing a school ID that doesn't have a social security number or a date of birth. Because then I guess only students would have school IDs at that point.
Right.
I think in that situation, now this company having a data.
I'm confused. How are you doing age verification by asking for a school ID?
It's going to say elementary.
Right. Only students would have
high school.
So if you don't have it, then how do you get on?
I'm sorry?
So if you don't provide your school ID, then how do you get on?
Then you can't get on.
I wouldn't have the school ID. I'm not in school.
Right. So basically,
but that's a tough call, because you have a lot of schools that are interacting with students via sometimes social media.
That's right.
It's really a tough call what they're doing. because you have children and there's different sites that they have to go to.
I don't think schools should do that though.
But they
That's-
do.
Yeah,
But they
yeah.
do.
I don't think they should like rely on students having a Twitter account to communicate with them.
Yeah, not Twitter, but it's interesting because sometimes they'll have their own social media service, if you want to call it that.
Right.
Like,
Right,
I've seen
but that's
that
fine.
where there's a
Yeah.
forum, like a school forum, like a message board where everyone in school is supposed
Yeah.
to, and sometimes they even post their homework assignments to it.
Right.
Yeah. So,
So-
in some way that's going to hinder, in some way, I don't know how they're going to work that out. It's going to be quite interesting to see how they organize all of this.
Yeah, I don't understand the whole argument about you can just show your student ID. I don't know how, like,
Because then only students could get on to a social media account because they have a student ID.
Right. And then if you don't have a student ID because you're an adult, you can't
Right.
just let anyone on, because then the kid can say, I'm an adult, so I don't have a student ID, and not provide one. Or you can't let people on if they don't
Yeah.
provide one. So
Right.
I don't know how
That's
that
true.
gets you there.
And you
Right.
have some students have access to their parents' information, and
Mhm.
you know,
There are a number of ways. If the goal is to keep students safe on social media, there are numerous ways to do that already. And we've had these things for, since the internet's been around. Every social media account has parental controls that can be implemented. Every device that you would use to access social media has parental controls that can be implemented. Parents have to do it. And if parents are really concerned about their student being, or their child being unattended in the wild west of the internet, then you put all access points in publicly available spaces. You put the computer in the, right? You don't give them a smartphone that has internet connectivity. You give them a Nokia where they can just make phone calls. Like,
or if you think they should be sheltered, homeschool them, keep them, if you think the world is too scary for them, keep them away from it.
Right.
I don't believe in that mentality, but people have different ideas.
Right.
But my granddaughter has had a cell phone since she was 10.
Right.
And I work, and it was Verizon, and I worked with Verizon, and they would ask me, Verizon asked me, how much access do you want her to have to certain apps?
Yeah.
They would call me and they would ask, she asked for this. We need to get your permission.
Yeah.
Because they locked that phone down when they found out her age, when they found out how young she was, they put in safety mechanisms to keep her, to limit her to certain websites.
Yeah.
That was automatic.
That's at the service level. We can even go one up and then go to the device level. If you have them have an Android or an iPhone, before you give it to them, go through and you put restrictions on the phone. Like,
exactly.
The stuff is there.
Yeah.
The stuff is there.
It is. But I was just saying, I remember them doing that because we kept that relationship. But you're right, they can do it that way too, to prevent anything from happening.
Yes.
Do you think, Sheba, that there's a danger in burdening adults by trying to keep children off social media without parental consent? You're making adults show their ID and jump through all these hoops. In the meantime, you're potentially restricting their ability to free speech or to access
I don't think
the government.
for adults. Oh, I'm sorry. You said, I'm sorry.
Access, for example, information provided by the government. Like you said, schools do a lot of social media with their kids. A lot of elected officials and police precincts and people, public information is disseminated through social media as well. And also a lot of people use social media to interact with their elected officials, right? It's a two-way street. And so by adding this burden to adults, are you restricting their free speech by making it harder for them to get online and on social media?
Yes, you are.
And do you think that it's worth doing that to meet this interest of protecting children?
No. I mean, if it's for children, make it for children.
Right.
I agree. I don't think it is. And we're seeing this sort of extreme measures that are trying to be pushed. Same with recently in the news, it came that Apple products might not be, Apple has their chat feature, their SMS feature, the FaceTime and the messages and whatnot, that might be going away for people that are in the UK. They might not be able to access it anymore because there's a new law that's trying to be pushed in the UK that would require that there be a backdoor put into these encrypted communications. So every message that you send to an Apple user between Apple users is encrypted so that even Apple can't look in on your conversations. And so the UK says we want backdoor access to all of this stuff. Same with WhatsApp, with Facebook's WhatsApp. And so Apple's took the stand like, no, we're not going to give a backdoor because it makes it less secure and it's about users' privacy. But they're saying, well, we need to protect children.
But see, that's I don't think that's fair to adults.
That's the thing
I don't think it's fair to adults. If they're looking at why did they bring the adults into it in the first place?
Well, because they're trying to
meant for protecting children.
They're trying to figure out who's a kid and who's not.
Yeah, you never know who's a kid and who's not when they sign up. So
they're making everyone show ID to try to prove who the adults are and who the kids are.
Right.
Well, then make it for the children. Make it put the burden of proof on the child.
But how do you prove if it's a child?
Well, they do. What do you put in? If it's not a violation, they can give their because I just went through it where they have a child, they have to scan their face. Is that a violation?
The adults will do that too, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but it'll be a difference. I just went through it where they put you through all of this and they scan all your information. And they scan, but if it's a child,
so then your
child can't.
Fine with the law. Then you want to implement these measures with the law. Then, because it's provides some sort of identification, some sort of verification.
That would be. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could argue that multiple ways. That might be seen as more intrusive or more restrictive if you're scanning someone's face.
Heck yeah,
but on the other hand, it might be easier to do because not everyone has ID or can get ID, but everyone has a face. Most people have a face,
Right. So if you're doing it for a child, believe me, when you scan a child's face, you could tell the difference.
Do you? Wait,
is it also easier to?
And what's the age limit of these children? When they say child, what's 18. The age limits?
18.
18?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do you want? Let me ask you a question though. Do you want Facebook or Twitter or whatever the social media platform is to have a big database of your child's biometric data like that?
They kind of do already though, with all the pictures that are uploaded.
Yeah.
But do you want them to be scanning your child to store?
Yeah, that is a little creepy. But also there's a good point. If 18 is the limit, is the algorithm going to know the difference between someone who's 17 and 6 months old and 18 and 6 months old?
No. You're not.
No.
So then it's going to be.
That's why they use the ID.
Right.
But anyway, we said we weren't going to go late, and we did. We have interesting discussions as always.
All right.
It's impossible to get this thing under an hour.
We've done it a couple times. We can do it. I know we can do it. So,
well, we need the bottom line. Is that the bottom line? Let's be brief.
Let's be brief. I think bottom line is in our efforts to protect children or even to protect ourselves, we have to be careful not to go above and beyond and cross the line into freedoms and into reasonable protections for people. And we have to accept that, some things are going to be our responsibility to handle internally and not push everything off on a government or a company to handle.
Spoken like a true libertarian.
So
actually, you're going to tell me about the non-aggression principle.
I have no idea what the non-aggression principle is. No idea.
Okay. Well, read up on it because now you're a libertarian in training.
I have no idea.
Next week.
Yeah, no idea what you're talking about.
See, I think it wants me to explain it this way. I look like the libertarian.
I'm not a libertarian either.
I know. Although I've been called a social libertarian once or twice.
I think, depending on what you say and who you're talking to, people are gonna get labels regardless.
Right.
Because, and we've talked about it before, like everybody, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, there's some issue you have a viewpoint that doesn't align with the label that's sitting with you. Like you could be a liberal. You could be a liberal and have a conservative point on something. You could be a conservative and have a liberal view on something. And if you're talking to someone who's a hard conservative, even though you're conservative, they can be like, hey, that point, that's very liberal. You must be a liberal. Like,
well, there's also a lot of overlap between different political philosophies in different areas, right? So if a libertarian says they're fiscally conservative but socially liberal, well, if you're a liberal everything, they're going to say, well, you got the half of the libertarians, but that's cherry picking which part of it. I mean, it's just, that's just in that one area.
Yeah. So
but my son would say, on a lighter note, I have 3 sons, and one of my sons would always tease. He's the younger son. He would tease his brother, the second son, and he always said he's a Democrat when it comes. He would always say, how would he say he's a Democrat on certain issues? He said, but when it comes to money, he is always conservative.
Some people
like a conservative.
Sounds like a libertarian. You should ask him about the non-aggression. I said he sounds like a libertarian. You should ask him about the non-aggression principle.
I sure will.
Yeah. So where can we be found, Mike?
We can be found everywhere podcasts are available. Of course, we do the live stream every Tuesday on Facebook. For those who join us live, we appreciate it. The replays are available on YouTube at Nuance Show. And pretty soon, I think we're going to get to 100,000 views on the YouTube channel, which will be great. We should actually plan something, some kind of big event or something to commemorate 100,000 views on YouTube. Of course, on Instagram, we can be found at Nuance Show. So hit us up, get involved in the discussion.
That was excellently done. Excellently done. Yeah. Very well.
Thank you, Sheba Abraham from the League of Women Voters, as usual. Thank you, Jay Carter, Timid,
You're welcome.
BLM Tokyo. Of course, I'm Mike Scala. This has been Nuance. As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.